Have you ever wondered about the hidden science behind your cannabis products?
Mhm.
I mean, beyond simply, growing the plant, there's this whole fascinating and really precise world of chemistry involved.
Oh, absolutely. Transforming that raw cannabis into everything from, say, potent edibles to pure CBD oils, it's quite a process.
Exactly. And today we're doing a deep dive into that world, and we really have to give a huge thank you to Iceni for pulling together all this incredible information.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And a special shout out to Operation Annihilation, who actually asked Iceni if we could help figure all this out.
Right.
So thanks for the prompt.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to sort of demystify these processes, right? The
Yeah.
ones that activate the beneficial compounds in cannabis.
To take that amazing aromatic essence, the terpenes.
And refine it into all the different forms we see. We'll get into the critical step of decarboxylation, which sounds technical, but is key.
And the importance of terpenes, which are often overlooked, I think.
Mm.
Plus, we'll look at the extraction and refinement techniques, from home kitchens right up to industrial labs.
Yeah, the goal is really to bring you the most important bits of knowledge, but in an easy-to-understand format. Make sure you're clear on, well, on the whole process.
We've pulled together insights from really a wide range of sources for this deep dive. There are scientific primers on terpene extraction.
Detailed guides on decarb methods you can actually use at home from experts like Emily Kyle Nutrition.
Discussions from online cannabis forums, places like Reddit and International Cannographic Magazine, where people share real-world experience.
And even official legal documents, stuff outlining cultivation laws and, industrial extraction standard operating procedures, like those from Wasatch Extraction.
So it's a pretty comprehensive look at a field that's it's constantly evolving.
Okay, let's dive in then.
The essential activation understanding decarboxylation.
Right, so let's start with what might be the absolute most crucial state if you're looking to use cannabis in any way other than just smoking it. Decarboxylation.
It sounds super scientific, doesn't it? But really, at its heart, it's a fundamental chemical change.
Okay, break it down. What's actually happening?
So in the raw cannabis plant, you don't actually have much THC or CBD directly. Instead, you have their acidic precursors, like THCA, that's tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, and CBDA, cannabidiolic acid.
The A stands for acid. Gotcha.
And in that raw acidic form, these compounds aren't really psychoactive. THCA won't get you high. And they're not fully bioavailable either, meaning your body can't absorb and use their potential benefits very effectively.
So decarboxylation is fixing that.
Precisely. Decarboxylation is the process of removing an extra bit from their chemical structure specifically, a carboxyl group. Think of it like unlocking a door. That carboxyl group keeps the cannabinoid inactive. When you apply heat, that group breaks off. So THCA loses the A and becomes THC, the compound we know, and CBDA becomes CBD. These are the activated forms that interact properly with our body's endocannabinoid system.
Right, so without that step, especially for edibles, you're just not getting the effect you're looking for.
Not at all. If you just light up a joint or use a vape, the intense heat does that conversion almost instantly. Combustion or vaporization heat is very high, very fast.
Okay, that makes sense.
But for edibles or tinctures or infused oils, you have to do this activation step before you consume it or infuse it into your butter or oil.
I bet a lot of people have made that mistake, trying to bake with raw flour and wondering why nothing happened.
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
probably one of the most common beginner errors in making edibles. You simply won't experience the full potency or the desired effects if you skip the decarb. You're basically just adding inert plant material.
It transforms the potential into actual active power then.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so if it's about heat, how do you get it right? It sounds like you could easily mess it up.
You definitely can. It's often called the Goldilocks principle for a reason. It needs to be just right. It's this delicate balance of temperature and time.
What happens if you get it wrong? Too hot, too cold?
Well, if you use too little heat or don't heat it for long enough, you get incomplete activation. Your end product will be weak, maybe even ineffective. You haven't converted enough THCA or CBDA.
Right, makes sense. And too much.
Too much heat or heating it for too long is also bad. You can actually start to degrade the valuable cannabinoids. THC, for instance, can degrade into CBN, which has different effects, more sedative.
Ah,
And perhaps even more importantly, you can destroy the delicate terpenes, those aromatic compounds we'll talk more about later.
yeah.
That affects the flavor, the aroma, and potentially the overall therapeutic effect.
So it needs to be precise, low and slow. Is that the general idea?
Generally, yes. Low and slow is the mantra for good decarboxylation. It helps ensure maximum conversion of the acids into active cannabinoids without significant degradation of either the cannabinoids or the terpenes. Precision is key.
Okay, low and slow. So what are we talking about in terms of actual numbers? What are the ideal temperatures and times for this delicate balance?
Most sources generally recommend a temperature range somewhere between 200 and 245 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 93 to 118 Celsius. That's kind of the sweet spot for overall effective decarb.
But does it vary depending on what you're trying to activate, like THC versus CBD?
It can, yes.
Yeah.
If you want to get really specific, you can target different cannabinoids. For example, Emily Kyle Nutrition suggests aiming for 240 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 116 Celsius, for about 40 minutes to convert THCA primarily into delta-9 THC.
40 minutes at 240F for THC? That seems doable.
It is, but there's always nuance. Some older research, like data from GW Pharma patents, suggested a slightly different approach for maybe the absolute best yield.
Oh, what did they suggest?
They proposed a lower temperature, around 221 Fahrenheit, but for a much longer time, 2 hours. Or possibly for a more forgiving window if your oven isn't perfect. They even mentioned 260 Fahrenheit for just half an hour.
Interesting. So there's some flexibility depending on your goal, maximum yield versus maybe speed or convenience.
Exactly. It shows there are different paths to get there, maybe with slight trade-offs in efficiency or perhaps minor terpene loss at higher temps. It's not always one single right answer.
Okay, so that's THC. What about CBD? People are often looking specifically for that.
Right. For converting CBDA into CBD, it actually needs a bit longer. The recommendation is typically 90 minutes, so an hour and a half, at that same 240 degrees Fahrenheit or 116 Celsius. CBD needs more time to fully convert.
90 minutes for CBD? Good to know. And any others people might target? What about CBG?
Yes, CBG cannabidiol, often called the mother cannabinoid. To activate CBGA into CBG, the optimal conversion is generally thought to be at a slightly lower temp, around 220 Fahrenheit or 105 Celsius, for about 60 minutes.
Okay, so different cannabinoids, slightly different recipes, essentially.
Pretty much. And it gets even more interesting when you think about deliberately changing the profile.
How so? Like, you mentioned THC degrading into CBN. Can you actually aim for that?
Yeah, you absolutely can. If you specifically want to encourage the degradation of THC into CBN, which is known for its more sedative, sometimes sleepy effects, making it popular for nighttime use, you'd intentionally overcook it, so to speak.
Right. How long are we talking?
Emily Kyle Nutrition suggests a much longer cook time, 180 minutes, that's 3 full hours at 240 Fahrenheit.
Wow, 3 hours.
Yeah, and this lines up perfectly with anecdotal reports, like one Reddit user who mentioned making cannabis in a crock pot for like 12 hours and ending up with what they called sleepy medicine.
Huh. Sleepy medicine. That's a great description. So definitely don't leave it cooking all day if you want an energetic effect.
Precisely. It shows how you can fine-tune the chemical profile for specific outcomes just by manipulating heat and time.
Given all these specific numbers, though, 240 degrees, 40 minutes, 90 minutes, accuracy must be super important, right? Especially with home ovens, which can be notoriously unreliable.
Absolutely critical. That's probably the biggest pitfall for home decarboxylation. Your oven might say it's a 240, but it could easily be fluctuating 10, 15, even 20 degrees Fahrenheit above or below that set point.
That's a huge difference when you're talking about these specific chemical reactions.
It really is. So investing a few bucks in a separate reliable oven thermometer that you place inside the oven is honestly one of the best things you can do for consistent results.
Good tip. It takes the guesswork out.
It does. It helps ensure your Goldilocks temperature is actually where you think it is, preventing underactivation, preventing degradation, and ultimately saving you from wasting good material and getting disappointing results.
Okay, so we understand the why and the what of decarboxylation. Let's talk about the how. How do people actually do this at home? What are the common methods?
Right. The most common and probably the most beginner-friendly is the good old oven method because, well, most people have an oven.
Makes sense. What do you need?
Pretty basic stuff. A baking sheet, some parchment paper or aluminum foil to line it. Helps with cleanup and prevents sticking. Your oven, obviously. And your cannabis. An optional grinder is helpful, but not essential.
Okay, and the process.
First, preheat your oven to that target range, say 220 to 240 Fahrenheit. Use that external thermometer. Place the rack in the middle position for the most even heat.
Middle rack, got it.
Then you want to break up your cannabis. You can do it by hand into smallish pieces, or use a grinder for a slightly coarser grind. The key is not to grind it into a superfine powder.
Why not grind it fine? Wouldn't that increase surface area?
It would, but too much surface area exposed directly to the oven's heat increases the risk of burning and degrading those volatile terpenes. A slightly coarser consistency is generally better for oven decarb.
Okay, interesting. Then what?
Spread it evenly in a single layer on your lined baking sheet. Pop it in the oven for typically 30 to 40 minutes, depending on your target cannabinoid and temperature.
Do you need to stir it?
Yes, definitely give it a gentle stir at least once, maybe twice during the process. This helps ensure everything gets heated evenly.
And how do you know when it's done?
It should look lightly toasted, maybe a bit golden brown, and it will likely be quite fragrant. Once the time is up, take it out and let it cool completely on the baking sheet for about 30 minutes at room temperature before you use it for infusions or anything else.
Sounds pretty straightforward. Pros are definitely the accessibility. What are the main cons again?
The biggest con is that potential lack of precise temperature control due to oven fluctuations. That can lead to uneven results or even burning if you're not watching it closely. And of course, the smell. Decarbing in the oven definitely fills your kitchen and maybe your house with a pretty distinct cannabis aroma.
Yeah, that smell can be a problem for some people, especially if you live in an apartment or have neighbors close by.
Exactly. And just to reiterate, definitely don't try using a microwave. The heating is way too uneven and uncontrolled. You'll almost certainly ruin your material.
Okay, so oven method. Simple, uses common gear, but watch the temp and be prepared for the smell. What if the smell is a deal breaker? Is there a more discreet option?
There absolutely is, and it's become quite popular for that very reason. The Instant Pot or pressure cooker method.
Ah, the trusty Instant Pot. How does that work for decarb?
This method is fantastic for odor control because everything happens inside a sealed jar. You'll need your Instant Pot or any electric pressure cooker, a glass mason jar with its lid and ring.
Basin jar.
Okay, and this is important. You only tighten the lid to fingertip tightness, just snug, not cranked down super tight. This allows a tiny bit of pressure equalization. You also need the trivet or steamer basket that came with your pot and some water.
Fingertip tight. Got it. What's the process?
First, break your cannabis into small popcorn-sized nugs. Fine grinding isn't necessary here, though some people still do it. Put the cannabis in the mason jar, seal it, fingertip tight. Place the jar on the trivet inside the Instant Pot liner. Then add enough water to come about 3/4 of the way up the side of the jar. Don't submerge it completely.
Right, then just pressure cook it.
Exactly. Seal the Instant Pot lid, set it to high pressure, and cook for the time required for your target cannabinoid. Remember, roughly 40 minutes for THC, 90 for CBD, 60 for CBG.
And when it's done?
Let the pressure release naturally for a bit if you can, or do a careful manual release. Then, very carefully remove the hot jar, use oven mitts, and let it cool completely on the counter before you open it.
Wow, that sounds way less smelly.
It is, significantly. That's the main advantage for many people. Plus, the temperature inside the pressure cooker under pressure is very stable and consistent, much more so than most ovens, so you get really reliable, even decarboxylation.
Better consistency and less smell. Any downsides or tips?
Well, sometimes the jars might try to float or tip over in the water, so you might need to weigh them down with something heat-safe, or just be careful with the water level. Also, as someone on Reddit pointed out, be careful if your Instant Pot automatically switches to the keep warm setting afterwards.
Ah, right, because that residual heat.
Exactly. If it stays on keep warm for too long, that extra heat, even though it's lower, could start converting your nice activated THC into that more sedative CBN. So turn it off promptly unless you want sleepy medicine.
Good point. So Instant Pot is great for discretion and consistency. What about maximum precision, especially for preserving those delicate flavors? Is there a method for that?
Yes. For the real precision geeks, there's the sous vide method.
Sous vide, like for cooking steaks.
Exactly like that. It uses an immersion circulator to maintain a water bath at an extremely precise temperature. For this, you need the circulator, a large pot or food-safe plastic tub for the water, a vacuum sealer, or good quality zip-top freezer bags suitable for sous vide, and your cannabis.
Okay, how does this one work?
You fill your container with hot tap water, put the immersion circulator in, and set it to a very precise temperature, often around 203 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 95 Celsius for decarb.
Lower temp than the oven or Instant Pot?
Yes, often a bit lower, relying on the precision and longer time. Because the temperature control is so exact, you can actually grind your cannabis quite finely here to maximize surface area without much risk of burning.
Ah, okay.
Seal the ground cannabis in your vacuum bag, getting as much air out as possible, making it flat and tight. This ensures good heat transfer from the water. Submerge the sealed bag in the precisely heated water bath.
And how long does it stay in there?
Typically for about 90 minutes at that 203-degree air of temperature.
Hmm.
Afterwards, just take the bag out, let it cool completely to room temperature, and then open it up.
What's the big win with sous vide?
Precision, precision, precision. The temperature control is unparalleled in a home setting. This is fantastic for preserving those extremely delicate terpenes and volatile flavor compounds that can easily be damaged or evaporated by the higher fluctuating temperatures in an oven.
So better flavor and aroma preservation.
Potentially, yes. And like the Instant Pot, it's also very low odor because everything is sealed in the bag. The main downside, of course, is the equipment. Not everyone has an immersion circulator and vacuum sealer lying around. It's more of an investment.
Right. So 3 solid methods: oven for accessibility, Instant Pot for smell control and consistency, and sous vide for ultimate precision and terpene preservation.
The aromatic alchemy terpenes and their preservation.
Okay, speaking of terpenes, let's really dive into those now. We've mentioned them a few times, mostly in the context of not wanting to destroy them during decarb. But what exactly are they and why are they so important? It's not just about the smell, right?
Not at all. I mean, the smell is the most obvious part, but it goes much deeper. Terpenes are these aromatic compounds produced in the same place as cannabinoids, those tiny, sticky, glandular trichomes that cover cannabis buds.
Like tiny little factories on the plant.
Exactly. And while THC and CBD get most of the headlines, cannabis can produce over 100 different terpenoid compounds. These are what give different cannabis strains their unique signature smells and tastes.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. How about the piney smell of pine, which you also find in pine needles, or the citrusy scent of limon, like in lemons and oranges. Mucine gives that earthy, musky aroma found in mangoes and hocks, and often associated with indica strains. Linalool is floral, like lavender. Caryophyllene is peppery, like in black pepper. These are essentially the core components of essential oils in many plants.
Okay, so they provide the sensory fingerprint, but you said it goes deeper.
It really does. This is where the concept of the entourage effect comes in, and it's incredibly important. Terpenes aren't just sitting there smelling nice. They have their own bioactive properties.
Like medicinal effects.
Yes. Terpenes are thought to contribute significantly to the overall therapeutic profile of cannabis. They can have anti-anxiety effects, anti-inflammatory properties, antibacterial action, sedative qualities. The list goes on. And crucially, they seem to work synergistically with cannabinoids like THC and CBD. They can enhance the positive effects of cannabinoids or even buffer some of the potentially unwanted side effects.
So the whole plant is greater than the sum of its parts.
That's the essence of the entourage effect. It suggests that using a full-spectrum extract, one that contains both cannabinoids and the natural blend of terpenes from the original plant, might offer a more complete and effective therapeutic outcome than using isolated THC or CBD alone.
That makes a lot of sense. You even mentioned terpene-only supplements gaining interest.
Absolutely. Because some terpenes can interact directly with our body's systems, including the endocannabinoid system, even without THC or CBD present. So researchers are exploring using specific isolated terpenes or blends of them for targeted effects like anxiety relief or inflammation reduction, potentially without any psychoactive high.
That's fascinating. So if terpenes are this important, what determines which terpenes a specific plant has and how much? Is it just genetics?
Genetics plays a huge role, defining the potential terpene profile of a strain. But unlike the cannabinoid profile, which tends to be relatively stable based on genetics, the actual terpene expression in a finished plant is highly influenced by environmental factors.
Like how it's grown.
Exactly. Soil nutrients, the amount of light, the light spectrum, temperature fluctuations during growth, even plant stress. All these things can significantly impact which terpenes are produced and in what concentrations. It's much more variable than the cannabinoid content.
So growing conditions really matter for that final aroma and potentially the effect.
Definitely. It's why two plants of the same strain grown in different environments can sometimes smell and taste quite different.
Okay, which brings us back to the challenge. If these terpenes are so important but also so delicate, how do you process the cannabis without losing them? Especially since decarboxylation needs heat, and heat seems to be the enemy of terpenes.
That is the central challenge, yes. Terpenes are inherently volatile compounds. Volatile means they evaporate easily, especially when exposed to heat. So think about it. Conventional oven drying of freshly harvested cannabis can destroy almost all the terpenes. Even just putting buds in a hot water bath can wipe out 50% of the terpenes in just 5 minutes.
Wow, they're really that sensitive.
They are, which is why preserving them during processes like extraction, which often involve heat and solvents, requires really specialized techniques.
Hmm.
You can't just blast it with heat and hope for the best if you want a high-quality, full-spectrum product.
So how do the pros handle this, especially when making something like a full-spectrum CBD oil where you really want those terpenes present?
The core issue is that the solvents used for extraction, combined with the heat often needed for efficiency or later refinement steps, can easily break down or evaporate those terpenes.
Right.
So a common solution, particularly in high-end production, is a careful two-step approach.
Hmm.
Step 1. Extract the delicate terpenes first, using very gentle methods. Step 2. Perform the main cannabinoid extraction, which might involve more heat or stronger solvents. Step 3. Carefully recombine the preserved terpene extract with the cannabinoid extract.
Ah, separate, extract, then reunite. Clever.
It allows you to create a final, full-spectrum oil that truly contains that original bouquet of terpenes, delivering the potential benefits of the entourage effect.
What kind of advanced extraction methods allow for that gentle first step, that terpene preservation?
There are a few key technologies. One involves using specialized vacuum drying ovens. These can operate at very low temperatures and pressures to gently coax the volatile terpenes out of the plant material along with water and maybe a mild solvent.
Okay.
This terpene-rich solution can then be collected and carefully purified, often through filtration, before being added back to the main cannabinoid extract later in the process. The key is keeping the heat low during that initial terpene pull.
Makes sense. And what about that green method you mentioned earlier, supercritical CO2? How does that help with terpenes?
Right, supercritical carbon dioxide, or SeCO2, extraction is hugely popular, partly because it's considered environmentally friendly and leaves behind no harmful solvent residues. It uses CO2 under specific temperature and pressure conditions, where it acts like both a liquid and a gas.
A supercritical state, right?
Exactly. This allows it to penetrate the plant material effectively and dissolve the desired compounds. And the beauty of SeCO2 for terpene preservation is that it can be operated as a cold separation process.
How does that work?
You can actually perform what's called a subcritical run first. This uses CO2 at lower temperatures and pressures, specifically targeting those highly volatile terpenes. You run this gentle cycle, collect the terpene fraction, and then you can ramp up the temperature and pressure for a full supercritical run to efficiently extract the cannabinoids like THC and CBD.
So you pull the terpenes off safely first with the gentler CO2 run.
Precisely. It's a highly effective way to protect these delicate compounds. Interestingly, some evidence suggests SeCO2 can sometimes even slightly enhance the concentration or profile of cannabinoids and terpenes compared to the starting material, perhaps by selectively extracting certain compounds more efficiently.
Wow, so it's not just preserving, it could potentially refine the profile too. Okay,
Yeah.
so you've got your cannabinoid extract, maybe you've added your separately extracted terpenes back in. Is the oil ready to go then, or is there more cleaning up to do?
There's usually one more crucial refinement step, especially for high-quality oils and concentrates: winterization.
Winterization. Sounds cold.
It is. Even after extraction, the raw cannabis oil still contains things you don't necessarily want in the final product, stuff like plant lipids, fats, waxes, and sometimes chlorophyll. These can make the oil cloudy, affect its stability and shelf life, and sometimes impart an unpleasant taste or harmness. Winterization is the process to remove these.
Okay, how do you winterize cannabis oil?
The process involves dissolving the raw extract in a solvent, usually food-grade ethanol. Then this solution is chilled to very low temperatures. We're talking below freezing, often down to -20 degrees C or even colder, sometimes using specialized cryochillers.
And what does the cold do?
At those frigid temperatures, the unwanted fats, lipids, and waxes solidify or precipitate out of the ethanol solution. They basically turn solid and cloudy, while the cannabinoids and terpenes remain dissolved in the cold ethanol.
Like fat congealing in cold soup broth.
Exactly like that. Once these impurities have solidified, the cold solution is carefully filtered. The filter catches the solid fats and waxes, while the clean, purified ethanol solution containing the cannabinoids and terpenes passes through.
Clever. Is that it?
Sometimes an additional step of carbon filtration might be used at this stage. Activated carbon can help remove chlorophyll, that green plant pigment, which can give extracts a dark color and sometimes a grassy, bitter taste.
Right, getting rid of the green taste.
Exactly. After filtration, the final step is to remove the ethanol solvent completely. This is usually done using techniques like rotary evaporation, which we talked about, or short path distillation, gently boiling off the alcohol under vacuum,
Leaving behind.
leaving behind a much purer, refined cannabis extract. Depending on its consistency and further processing, this purified extract, once all solvent is removed and it's dried, can sometimes result in a hard, translucent, amber-colored product known as shatter, which is highly concentrated in cannabinoids and terpenes. For medicinal oils or vape cartridges, this winterized, purified oil often undergoes further distillation steps to isolate specific cannabinoids or achieve even higher purity.
From lab to market industrial extraction and refinement processes.
Okay, that winterization step really highlights the level of refinement involved. Now let's scale this up. We've talked about home methods and lab principles, but how does this look in a full-blown industrial setting where they're processing large volumes?
Well, the core principles remain similar, but the equipment and scale are obviously vastly different. Distillation, which we touched on with winterization solvent removal, becomes a really central process in industrial refinement.
Just like distilling alcohol, but for cannabis compounds.
Essentially, yes. Distillation works by separating liquid components based on their different boiling points. You heat the mixture, components vaporize at different temperatures, you condense the vapor, and collect the separated liquids.
But you mentioned earlier that cannabinoids and terpenes have really high boiling points. Wouldn't that require intense heat, risking degradation?
That's exactly the problem with trying to distill them at normal atmospheric pressure. Those boiling points are high, like 156 to 250 Celsius, or roughly 312 to 482 Fahrenheit. Direct heating to those temperatures would absolutely cause oxidation and thermal decomposition, ruining the product.
So how do industrial processors get around that?
The key is vacuum distillation. By applying a strong vacuum to the distillation system, you significantly lower the pressure inside. And just like water boils at a lower temperature at high altitude where the air pressure is lower, cannabinoids and terpenes will boil at much, much lower temperatures under vacuum.
Ah, clever. Lower boiling point means less heat needed.
Precisely. You can often distill these compounds at temperatures well below their normal boiling points, sometimes reducing the required heat by over 100 degrees Celsius. This prevents thermal degradation, and because it's under vacuum, there's no oxygen present to cause oxidation. It's absolutely essential for preserving quality and potency at scale.
Okay, so vacuum is key. What kind of specialized gear are they using for this industrial scale vacuum distillation?
There are several key pieces of apparatus. One workhorse, even at larger scales, is the rotary evaporator, or rotovap. We mentioned it for solvent removal after winterization. Its main job is efficient solvent removal under vacuum, but it's crucial. These aren't just small benchtop units. You see pilot scale and industrial rotovaps with flask sizes of 20 liters, 50 liters, even 100 liters, capable of handling large batches of extract solution.
Can you remind us how it works again, quickly?
Sure. The flask containing the extract dissolved in solvent rotates rapidly in a heated bath, gentle heat, maybe 30–40 degrees C. The vacuum lowers the solvent's boiling point. A cold condenser turns the solvent vapor back into liquid for collection. The rotation creates a thin film inside the flask, massively increasing the surface area for super fast, efficient evaporation at low temperatures.
Efficient solvent stripping. Got it. What about separating the actual cannabinoids from each other, like getting pure THC or CBD?
For that, you move beyond simple solvent removal to more sophisticated distillation techniques. Short path distillation is common. This is designed specifically to separate compounds with high boiling points under vacuum.
How does that setup differ?
In a short path system, the crude cannabis oil is heated in a flask, usually with magnetic stirring for even heat. The key is that the condenser is placed very close to the evaporation surface, hence short path. The vapor travels only a very short distance before it hits the cold condenser and liquefies. This minimizes the chances of the vapor recondensing before it's collected.
And you can collect different compounds separately.
Yes, often these systems have multi-position receiving flasks. As you slowly increase the temperature of the oil, different compounds will vaporize based on their boiling points under that specific vacuum level. First, you might collect the lighter terpenes. Then, as the temperature rises, you switch flasks to collect the THC fraction, and then maybe the CBD fraction. You separate them sequentially.
Okay, separating fractions. Is there a way to get even purer fractions?
Yes, for higher purity separation, you'd use fractional distillation. This is basically an enhanced version of short path. The key difference is the addition of a fractionating column placed between the boiling flask and the condenser.
A column. What does that do?
This column, which might have specialized packing or internal structures like Vigroux indentations or Oldershaw trays, provides a large surface area. As the vapor mixture rises through the column, it undergoes multiple cycles of vaporization and condensation on these surfaces. With each cycle, the separation between components with different boiling points becomes more refined.
Like multiple mini distillations happening one after the other.
Exactly. It allows for a much finer separation, leading to purer fractions of THC, CBD, or other target cannabinoids. It's essential if you need very high purity distillates.
And for really large-scale continuous operations, is there something even more advanced?
For high throughput and efficiency, especially in continuous processing, wiped film distillation, sometimes called thin film distillation, is often used. It's another variation of short path distillation.
Wiped film, how does that work?
In this setup, the crude oil is continuously fed onto the top of a heated vertical cylinder under vacuum. Inside the cylinder, rotating wipers continuously spread the oil into an extremely thin film on the heated inner surface.
Ah, creating a thin film for fast evaporation.
Precisely. As the oil flows down, the target compounds evaporate very quickly from this thin film. There's usually a condenser located right in the center of the cylinder, which is kept cold. The vapor hits this internal condenser and liquefies, then flows down to be collected separately from the residual, less volatile material that continues down the walls.
What's the big advantage there?
The major benefit is extremely short residence time. The oil is only exposed to the high heat for a matter of seconds as it gets wiped down the cylinder wall. This drastically minimizes thermal degradation, preserving the quality of sensitive compounds. And because it can run continuously, feeding oil in and collecting distillate and residue simultaneously, it offers significantly higher productivity than batch distillation methods. But it requires very precise control over feed rate, temperature, wiper speed, and vacuum level.
It really sounds like high-tech chemical engineering applied to cannabis. Can you maybe walk us through a snapshot of a real-world industrial workflow, like at a place like Wasatch Extraction? How do all these pieces fit together?
Sure, looking at their documentation gives a good glimpse. For example, their process might start even before the main extraction, with pre-extraction decarboxylation, maybe in large ovens, followed by meticulous filtration of the incoming oil.
Filtration first.
Yeah, they might filter the oil through progressively finer filters, say, starting with a 25-micron filter, then down to 10 micron, and finally through a 1-micron charcoal-activated filter. This initial cleanup removes particulate matter and some impurities right at the start, making subsequent steps more efficient.
Makes sense. What about the integrated systems? You mentioned cryochillers earlier.
Right. These industrial setups are complex networks of equipment working together. You'll see powerful cryochillers, maybe using ethanol cooled by liquid nitrogen to achieve the ultra-low temperatures needed for efficient winterization or for cooling the condensers on distillation units. Everything is connected by intricate piping and valve systems, often automated. Specialized pumps, like maybe an alley cat pump, are used for circulating tinctures or moving extracts between stages. It's a highly engineered environment.
And quality control must be intense in that kind of setup.
Absolutely non-negotiable. Companies like Wasatch have incredibly strict quality assurance protocols. For instance, ensuring residual solvents in the final product are below a legally mandated threshold, often something like 500 parts per million. This requires constant testing and validation.
And safety. With solvents and heating.
Safety is paramount. They'll have detailed standard operating procedures, SOPs, for every single task, from operating equipment to handling materials. Comprehensive emergency plans for things like fires or chemical spills are mandatory. Rigorous training for all staff is involved. It's a highly regulated industrial environment.
And I imagine security is also a massive consideration given its cannabis.
It's extremely tight. Think about transportation, for example. Detailed manifests track every gram of product. It must be transported in locked, secure containers. Vehicles have to travel directly to their destination, a dispensary or testing lab, with no unauthorized stops. Routes and delivery times are often randomized. Constant communication is required, and loading-unloading happens under constant camera surveillance. It's Fort Knox-level security.
Wow. And they must have procedures for things like recalls, too.
Definitely. Detailed recall procedures are part of their SOPs, outlining exactly what happens if a product needs to be pulled from the market due to quality or safety concerns. It covers everything from identification to notification to retrieval and disposal.
Okay, so after all that intense extraction, purification, distillation, what's the very final step before it reaches the consumer?
The final stage is formulation and packaging. The bulk purified oil or distillate needs to be processed into the actual products people buy. This might involve precisely dosing it into tincture bottles, maybe adding flavorings, filling vape cartridges, capping and sealing bottles, cleaning everything meticulously, inspecting each unit for quality, and finally packaging it all into compliant, labeled containers ready for sale. It's the final assembly line, ensuring consistency and compliance right to the end.
The regulatory reality cannabis cultivation laws in the UK.
Okay, we've covered the science and the tech from kitchen counters to industrial plants. But none of this happens in a vacuum, legally speaking. Let's pivot and look at the regulatory reality, specifically focusing on cannabis cultivation laws here in the UK, in England and Wales. It's a hot topic.
It certainly is, and it's crucial to understand the legal framework. In England and Wales, cannabis is classified as a Class B controlled substance under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. That classification is key.
Class B, what does that mean in practice?
It means that unauthorized activities like possession, production, supply, or cultivation are illegal and subject to potentially serious penalties. For cultivation specifically, Section 6 of the Act is crystal clear. It states, essentially, that it's an offense to cultivate any plant of the genus cannabis unless you have a specific license issued by the Secretary of State, usually the Home Office.
No ifs, ands, or buts. You need that license.
Without that specific license, growing cannabis plants is illegal. Period.
Now, there was that change in 2018 regarding medicinal cannabis. A lot of people might think, okay, if I have a prescription, surely I can grow my own for my medical needs. Is that the case?
That's a very common misunderstanding, but no, that's not the case. The 2018 rescheduling allowed specialist doctors to prescribe cannabis-based medicinal products under certain conditions. It did not legalize home cultivation for personal medical use, even with a prescription.
So the prescription allows you to possess and use the prescribed product, but not grow the plant yourself.
Exactly. The law makes sharp distinctions between possessing a prescribed medicine and producing a controlled drug. They are entirely different legal concepts.
Okay, that's a really important clarification. So what are the main offenses under UK law related to cannabis that people should be aware of?
There are several key ones defined in the Misuse of Drugs Act. You have cultivation under Section 6, which is simply the act of growing the plant itself, from seed or clone.
Right.
Then there's production under Section 4. This is broader and includes cultivation, but also harvesting, drying, processing, basically preparing cannabis for use or supply.
Okay, covers more steps.
Then you have possession under Section 5, which is just having cannabis on you or under your control. And a more serious offense, possession with intent to supply, under Section 5.3. This usually involves larger quantities, scales, baggies, cash, phone evidence, things that suggest distribution rather than just personal use.
And the courts treat these differently.
Yes, the context, the quantity, your criminal record, whether it's deemed personal use or commercial supply, all these factors influence how each offense is charged and sentenced.
So is it ever possible to grow cannabis legally in the UK? You mentioned that home office license.
Yes, but only under very limited and tightly controlled circumstances. Cultivation is legal only if you hold one of those specific home office licenses.
And who gets those licenses? What are they for?
They are granted very sparingly and primarily for three specific purposes.
Yeah.
1, legitimate medical research, like clinical trials for new cannabis-based medicines. 2, pharmaceutical manufacture, where a company is licensed to grow cannabis to produce licensed medicines like Sativex or Epidiolex. And 3, industrial hemp production.
Industrial hemp.
Yes, growing hemp varieties that naturally contain very low levels of THC, specifically less than 0.2% THC content for fiber, seeds, or hurd. But even that requires a specific home office hemp cultivation license.
Okay, so basically, large-scale research, pharma, or specific low THC hemp. How hard is it actually to get one of these licenses? Is it something a small business or an individual could realistically apply for?
Realistically, no. The application process is incredibly rigorous and expensive. You need a detailed security plan, operational plan, proof of capability, significant financial resources. The application fee alone starts around £4,700, plus ongoing fees. You need secure facilities, background checks for staff. It's really geared towards established organizations with significant infrastructure and expertise.
So the bar is set extremely high. It's not designed for personal growers or small startups.
Not at all. The vast majority of individuals or small groups simply wouldn't meet the stringent requirements for approval.
Okay, let's hammer this home then. To be absolutely crystal clear for anyone listening in the UK, what is definitely not legal when it comes to growing cannabis?
Right. Number 1. There is no legal allowance for growing cannabis at home for your own personal medical use, even if you have a doctor's prescription for a cannabis-based medicine.
Got it.
Number two, there is no legal allowance for growing cannabis for recreational use. Zero tolerance.
Okay.
Number three, even if you only want to grow CBD-rich plants to make your own CBD oil, that still requires a home office cultivation license. Homemade CBD production from unlicensed plants is illegal.
Wow, even for CBD.
Yes, and the authorities emphasize that even growing a single plant for your own self-treatment is still a breach of Section 6. It's still cultivation, and it is prosecutable.
One plant is still an offense. That's stark. What kind of penalties could someone face if they are caught cultivating cannabis?
The penalties vary hugely depending on the scale and nature of the operation. The Sentencing Council guidelines give a framework. For what's deemed personal use cultivation, typically involving a small number of plants, maybe 1 to 9, the outcome is often a community order, or maybe a suspended sentence, though fines are possible too.
Okay, for small scale, what about larger grows?
If it looks like a small commercial setup, say 10 to 50 plants, maybe with some basic equipment, you could be looking at 1 to 3 years imprisonment.
And bigger operations?
For operations deemed organized crime scale, maybe 50-plus plants. Sophisticated setups, multiple locations, evidence of supply networks, the penalties jump significantly, potentially 5 to 10 years imprisonment, or even more in some cases, up to the maximum of 14 years for production.
So the scale really matters. How do police usually find these grows?
Often it's based on intelligence. This could be tip-offs from the public, maybe neighbors noticing unusual activity or strong smells. Energy companies sometimes flag unusually high electricity consumption, which can indicate grow lights.
Right, the electricity bills.
Exactly.
Right.
If police have reasonable grounds to suspect cultivation, they can obtain a warrant to enter and search a property. If they find plants or equipment, they'll seize it all and make arrests. While historically some police forces might have issued warnings for very small first-time personal grows, that practice seems much less common now. Enforcement is generally quite proactive.
Okay, so the current law is strict, enforcement is active, but as we know, there's a lot of public discussion and calls for reform, right? People pointing to changes happening elsewhere in the world.
Yes, there's definitely a significant and ongoing public debate here in the UK. You have MPs, advocacy groups, legal campaigners all arguing for changes to the current cannabis laws.
What kind of changes are being proposed?
The proposals cover a spectrum. Some advocate for decriminalizing the possession of small amounts for personal use. Others specifically push for legalizing small-scale personal cultivation, particularly for verified medical users who find prescribed products inaccessible or unaffordable. There are also calls for clearer, more accessible licensing pathways for CBD cultivation and production, and maybe standardizing THC thresholds for hemp to align better with international norms.
But has any of this translated into actual legal change yet?
Despite these strong calls for reform, and despite seeing significant legislative changes in places like Canada, Germany, many U.S. states, and others, no major reforms to decriminalize personal cultivation or recreational use have actually passed through the UK Parliament to date. The legal status quo, as we've described it under the Misuse of Drugs Act in 1971, remains firmly in place.
So lots of talk, but no change in the law itself for growers right now.
That's the current situation. And it's important for us, just reporting on this, to state clearly that we're presenting the facts of the existing laws and the ongoing debates impartially. We're not endorsing any particular viewpoint, just outlining the legal landscape as it stands today in England and Wales. Outro.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of ground today, haven't we?
We really have. It's been quite a journey.
Yeah, we started right at the beginning with that fundamental chemistry of decarboxylation, turning those raw plant acids into active THC and CBD.
Exploring why that's so vital, especially for edibles, and how to actually do it at home using methods like the oven, the Instant Pot, or even sous vide for precision.
Then we dove into the world of terpenes, not just smell, but their potential role in the entourage effect and the real challenge of preserving them during processing.
Absolutely. And we looked at how the industry tackles that challenge with sophisticated extraction and refinement techniques, from SeCO2 extraction to winterization and various forms of distillation like short path and wiped film.
Seeing how complex those industrial setups are, like the Wasatch extraction example, was pretty eye-opening. The level of engineering and control is incredible.
It really is. And finally, we grounded everything in the current legal reality here in the UK, outlining the strict laws around cultivation and the requirements for any legal growing.
What really stands out to me from all this is that amazing intersection of, well, biochemistry, advanced engineering, and these constantly shifting societal views and legal frameworks around cannabis.
You're right. It's this fascinating blend where, ancient plant knowledge meets cutting-edge technology, all happening within this really complex legal and ethical landscape that's still very much evolving.
Yeah, understanding all those different layers, the science, the tech, the law, really helps you become, well, just more informed about the whole picture.
Hopefully, it helps appreciate the journey these compounds take, from a simple plant to a refined product.
Definitely. And we really hope this deep dive has helped clarify a lot of the science and the practical processes for you. We aim to explain everything in a plain, easy to follow format, so hopefully you feel clearer on what constitutes a good process, whatever your interest might be.
And a huge thank you again to Icini for pulling together such comprehensive information for us to work with.
Absolutely. And to Operation Annihilation for asking Icini the question that sparked this whole exploration. It's exactly this kind of curiosity and detailed information we love to dive into.
We really do strive to bring you valuable, well-researched content like this.
And honestly, every little bit of support helps our channel grow. It allows us to keep bringing you these in-depth looks at fascinating topics. So if you enjoyed this deep dive, if you found it useful,
Please do consider hitting that like button, maybe share it with someone else who might be interested, and definitely subscribe if you haven't already.
your support truly makes a difference. Thank you.
So wrapping up, here's a thought to leave you with. As our scientific understanding of cannabis continues to deepen, and as global policies keep shifting and evolving, what new frontiers do you think might open up in the coming years? How might we understand, process, or even legally access cannabis differently in the future?
That's definitely something to chew on. What's next for cannabis science and policy? A fascinating question indeed.